Hi, boys and girls. Today we're reading a story called Fishing in the Desert, and I think you probably would like the story. The questions that are being asked on this story is, how does fishing in the desert relate to last week's story, How a Mountain Changes? Okay, so we're comparing two stories. Not really comparing, but we're going to be talking about how those two stories are alike, in what ways they're alike. We have the word right here that says, how are they related? Okay, so how is fishing in the desert related to or alike and similar to last week's story of how a mountain changes? Well, if you're like me, I don't remember both stories, so I'm going to click right here and get right into our stories and go back and reread them because I don't remember necessarily what exactly they were about. But I need to talk about how the two stories are alike. So let's get into our book and see if we can come up with some ways that those two stories are alike. All right, when you get into Benchmark Universe, you don't need to save it. And I've taught you a couple of ways to get into your story quickly.
Change.
But I'm going to teach you another way to get there quickly. If you see your table of contents here on this first page. All right, so we are looking for fishing in the desert, and I see it right here. I'm going to click on that, and it will take me there. So there's another trick on how to do it. Okay, here's our story of fishing in the desert, and the first thing I want to do, I know my title is called Fishing in the Desert, and that's kind of a confusing title because you know, like I know, there's no fish. Fish live in water, and we're in a desert. There's no water in the desert, right? But I see some characters down here. Looks like a woman or a girl on her knees. And I see old man and a little girl over here and some shovels. And then I see some things down here on the ground. So let's start our story, and we'll go back to these pictures and see if we can figure out how those pictures go along with our story. Here we go. On my 8th birthday, my grandpa came to my house. He said he was taking me fishing. We got into his truck, and an hour later, we were in the desert. Gramps, how are we going to fish here? I asked. He just smiled and introduced me to our guide, Anna. All right, so now I have some more details, right? So this must be me in the story. This must be my grandfather. And this must be our guide, Anna. All right, let's keep going. Paragraph 2. Anna said that millions of years ago, the desert was covered by a lake. Now I'm understanding why the fish are there, right? Millions of years ago, this land, this desert, wasn't a desert, right? It was a lake. So that makes sense of why there's fish. Anna said millions of years ago, the desert was covered by a lake. The lake was filled with different kinds of marine life. Crocodiles even roamed the shore. Anna showed us how to use the tools she brought to dig. By the end of the day, we found 8 fish fossils. They are fishing for fossils. And look, there they are. So they're digging up and fishing for fossils. On the way home, I thanked Gramps for taking me on the best fishing trip ever. Okay, so that story is about they're fishing for fossils. So we've learned about fossils with dinosaurs, right? Fossils are what is left behind after an animal or a fish or something dies. It's the imprints or that the body and the bones have left behind that we can find. All right, so fishing in the desert is about how things changed long ago. Long ago, it used to be a lake, and now it's a desert. So that lake has changed over millions of years. All right, so that's our story of fishing in the desert. Now, the other story that it asked, let me go back and double check. Fishing in the desert, how does it relate to last week's story, How a Mountain Changes? All right, so let's go find How a Mountain Changes. I'm going to do it the same way that I did. Go into my Benchmark Universe book. And my internet's taken a bit of a while today. Maybe it's not going to want to work. I don't know. Let me try it again. Now it's working. Okay. So how a mountain changes is the next story that we're going to find and see how it relates or it is similar to fishing in the desert. Okay. I seem to recall that story of how a mountain changes. Remember, it was about a new mountain and an old mountain. Okay, so it's right here in our book, How a Mountain Changes. I'm going to click on it. It'll take me right there. I was the mountain. Okay, so I remember this story. All right, here we go. How a mountain changes. You can tell if a mountain is young or old by looking at it. A young mountain has sharp, craggy peaks. An older mountain is more rounded because it has weathered longer. As centuries passed, wind blows away more and more of the mountain. Rain carried debris down the mountainside, wearing away ever more soil and rock. Over time, wind and rain are like carvers, changing a mountain's size and shape. All right, so we're wanting you to think a little bit deeper on this because clearly this story is about mountains, and the other story was how a lake changed and is now a desert. But what's changing in this story? You're right. It's the mountain. The mountain is changing. The young mountain has sharp, craggy peaks, right? I see sharp peaks. That mountain has changed over time. This is the older mountain, right? That mountain has changed. It's not sharp anymore. It's definitely more rounded. So if I were to talk about how those two stories are related, what could I say? Okay, so let me go back to our question. I have a sentence starter for you. The story, Fishing in the Desert, and How a Mountain Changes are similar because they both, what? What were they both about? You're right. I hope that you're thinking what I'm thinking. They were about how things change over time, right? It's not just a day or two that those changed. That's millions of years, hundreds and thousands of years. Those mountains changed over long periods of time, and so did that lake to a desert. All right, please make sure that you complete my sentence. Make sure you put a period at the end. Make sure you read it back to yourself and it makes sense. Always restate the question when you're doing your answers. Okay, let's look at number 2. How does the picture help you to understand how lakes change over time? So we're going to look back at that picture. We talked about it a little bit when I read it to you, but we're going to talk about how lakes change over time. How does that picture help you to understand that? And I've given you a sentence starter on here. The picture helps me understand how lakes change over time by what is the picture telling you? All right, let's go back and look real quick. I'm going to flip up a few pages here. And it was one more page right here. So look at that picture. How does that help you to understand how this lake changed over time? All right, so make sure that you answer that question in a complete sentence. You can add a couple more sentences if you want to. All right, guys, good luck today. See you later.